Good morning. Welcome to the Howell Nature Center. I am Julie Delazine. I'm the pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Warren, and most recently I served on the board of directors here for the last 3.5 years before being called to serve in a different way in the presbytery. Joining me in the presentation this morning is Reverend Alexander Haynes from First of Howell, and J.C. Carlson, who is the CEO at Howell Nature Center. And where's Dana? Dana DeVeno, who's our wildlife director here. So 56 years ago, this land was bought by the Synod of Michigan to create a camp and conference center. In 1974, the land was transferred to the Presbytery of Detroit when the Synod divided into presbyteries. Today, the Howell Nature Center is one of the largest PCUSA-related camps and conference centers across the country in terms of people served and the annual budget as well. Now, 4 years ago, it was spun off from the Presbytery as a separate 501c3, with the trustees of the Presbytery as the sole member. The trustees appoint a board of directors. So this is one of the largest outreach ministries of the Presbytery in terms of the people served and touched, and not only people, but also wildlife. If you've been watching the news this week, you know that would be true, the lynx coming in. As we've gone through this transition as an organization of being in a different relationship with the Presbytery, though still very much connected, the Howell Nature Center is looking for ways and hoping you'll help us think of ways that Howell Nature Center can help to strengthen and transform your congregation. The theme of our Presbytery meetings, our program this year, is the mission statement of the Presbytery, which is transforming and strengthening congregations to be missional, pastoral, and prophetic. We're all going to have that memorized by the end of the year, I assure you. And as the four of us were planning and looking ahead to today, we noticed that the missional, pastoral, prophetic connected well with the Howell Nature Center motto of heal, grow, be wild. Heal, pastoral, grow, missional, be wild, prophetic. So today we're going to be exploring this with the help from a few friends.
Begin our program with healing, to heal. And we have some guests for you. He's anxious to meet you. The snowy owl is an infrequent visitor to our area, as their natural habitat is way up north in the Arctic tundra. Their favorite food is the lemming, a little rodent found in the Arctic. Snowy owls nest on the ground, as there are no trees due to the permafrost. They can lay more or fewer eggs depending on food availability, which is those lemmings. Lemmings are doing very well right now, scientists believe, due to the rising global temperatures. So lots of food available, and many experts believe more snowy owls are being hatched every year. The last few years have been what is called an eruption year. And that is when the owls migrate down to the northern United States looking for new winter hunting territory. This is how we found our beautiful Yeti. Yeti was discovered in a backyard in Flushing, Michigan. He had an eye injury, which ultimately proved to be permanently blind. Sadly, this young male owl could never be returned to the wild. The eye could not be healed. Rather than returning to the Arctic at the end of winter, his home is now here at the Howell Nature Center. In Eruption, the journey that brought him to Michigan, is a change of path. Yeti's injury ultimately changed his life's path forever. His pastoral path now is to allow our species a rare glimpse of the beauty God has blessed us with in the natural world. His amazing creation, of which we all need to show better stewardship. God's gift of natural beauty heals us all. Thank you, Mindy.
John's Gospel tells us that one time when Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth, and his disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" But Jesus answered, "It was not that this man sinned or his parents. It was so that the works of God might be displayed in him." I don't know, we sometimes get the idea that when Jesus heals people, that's like something weird. That's out of the ordinary. That's an aberration from the natural world. I think we've got the wrong perspective. Because I think what Jesus shows us in healing people throughout time is the reality, is the true way the world is supposed to be. The way that the world was made, the way that the world will become again, the way that God intends people's lives to be. You know, Christians are, like Yeti, broken people who find healing, find comfort in a community of other people, people who are healed by God in some way. And when that owl came in, you didn't take a look at it and say, "Oh, yet another snowy owl." No, you're excited about this special creature, this beautiful creature, and I would hate to think that we look at other human beings and think, "Oh, yet another human being." Because the truth is, we are broken. We do suffer those injuries. We do suffer those problems, those deep hurts. And yet, God will use healing to glorify himself. We thought briefly about putting up a paper tree or something over the fireplace, and then realized that you probably shouldn't put paper over a fireplace. Plus, the tree would be a little intimidated, you know. But in the end of the Bible, in Revelation 22, it tells us that the tree of life will be there with leaves that are for the healing of the nations. Not just for individuals, so that's part of it, but for the healing of the nations, for the healing of whole communities, for the healing of whole peoples. So I'd like you to find a partner, somebody who's not from the same congregation as you. You might have to even go to another table. I don't know, we can do it though. And I'd like you to answer just a couple of questions together. First, to share something that needs healing in your congregation. And then to reflect on how these stories of humans and animals can teach us about healing. And finally, how can that healed brokenness glorify God? Okay, so find a partner from another church. What needs healing in your congregation? What can we learn from these stories? And how can healing glorify God?
We have someone else to share with you as well. Keely the bald eagle was injured as a young eaglet when his nest was blown down in a storm near Saginaw. A sibling survived the fall, and they were able to place it in a surrogate nest, and it flew off to the wild later on. Keely, unfortunately, did have a wing injury and was sent to Michigan State University, where it was determined that his wing would need a partial amputation. Obviously, he would not return to the wild. Knowing this, he was intentionally imprinted on humans so he would be a better educational bird. Imprinting is the process of a young bird forming a permanent identity bond with its caretakers. In the wild, that would be their wild adult parents. As the baby grows, this bond prepares them for survival. For Keely, this bond is with us. It is irreversible, yet very, very special. Our handlers use that bond every day to grow trust with these birds. It is an enormous privilege and responsibility to build this partnership with one of God's most magnificent creatures. Thank you, Keely and Beth.
So we grow when we learn about others, when our curiosity and maybe even God's calling leads us outside of what we know to that risk zone that JC talked about, to experience something or someone new. And Dana shared with us how after Keely's injury, Keely had to grow in new ways. He was imprinted by a new community. I don't know if I'm using that verb correctly, but he learned about us so he could function in our world, so he could share the good news about being a bald eagle, sometimes in some very loud ways. And he made me think about Paul's words in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. I'm going to read it from the Message version. Paul writes, "Even though I am free of the demands and expectations of everyone, I have voluntarily become a servant to any and all in order to reach a wide range of people, religious, non-religious, meticulous moralists, loose-living immoralists, the defeated, the demoralized, whoever. I didn't take on their way of life. I kept my bearings in Christ, but I entered their world and tried to experience things from their point of view. I've become just about every sort of servant there is in my attempts to lead those I meet into a God-saved life. I did all this because of the message, because of the gospel. I tried to experience things from their point of view." And this seems to me essential for mission and ministry. Paul doesn't always get this right. We don't always get this right. But Paul reminds us that this is at the core of the gospel. This is what God does in Jesus. God allows God's self to be imprinted on by us in a way. God comes to us in order to reach us, to love us, to know us more. And Keely made me think that one of the goals of mission should be becoming imprinted on by your neighbors. How do we learn to speak the language of our neighbors so that we might love them more? And maybe even so we might be changed by them. So with your partner, I'd like you to talk about just for a couple minutes, in what ways have your neighbors imprinted on you as a church? How have your neighbors changed you? What new ways might you seek to be imprinted upon by your neighbors?
All right, we're going to move on now to being wild or prophetic. And we have one more guest to share with you. If she's cooperative this morning. Spring isn't really truly here, and I'll explain in a moment. So woodchucks, or groundhogs, as they are also known, are one of only a handful of wild animals in Michigan that go into a full hibernation in the wintertime. This adaptation allows them to survive during a time when there is nothing green for an herbivore to eat. Dormant in their burrow for many months, the woodchuck's body temperature will drop from 98 degrees, like ours, to just 40 degrees. They are like a frozen little ball down there. This is an adaptation to conserve energy when they are not going to be eating for many, many months. And they will lose up to half of their body weight during their winter sleep. Here's Woody. So for those who don't know this famous groundhog, Woody here is, of course, Michigan's official Groundhog Day groundhog. She's a little grumpy because she is a hibernator, and it's a little early for her to be coming out and about with us. For 20 years, Woody has been predicting the weather. And yes, prognosticating woodchucks live forever. Forever. So for 20 years on February 2nd, she has been predicting whether or not we will have an early spring or 6 more weeks of winter. Woody is the prophetic one, the teller of truth. This year, she predicted an early spring. So I'm going to leave all that up to you to decide whether she was right or wrong. Our very popular Groundhog Day event here at the Howell Nature Center actually evolved from Candlemas Day in Europe, which is a celebration of the halfway point of winter. Here at the Howell Nature Center, it is a fun and silly way for us all to come out of our burrows, to join with our neighbors near and far, and build a wonderful community connection. We rely on our wild friend here to unite us in our joy of the coming spring, a rebirth of God's creation when the world is new again.
One of the things that I like about Woody is that he's hairier than any of the biblical prophets, with the possible exception of John the Baptist. Deuteronomy has some pretty harsh words for false prophets, so I'm hoping we're not going to enforce any of those. We're going to take some of that blurred lines sometimes. But the real distinguishing thing in the Bible between false prophets and true prophets is that false prophets end up being basically okay with things the way they are. Prophets, on the other hand, are not content with the way the world is. They really believe in that the natural world, the way the world naturally is not the way that it is in its fallen state. Psalms tells us, "Put not your trust in princes, in a son of man in whom there is no salvation." So how on earth, if they're not putting their trust in princes, can prophets stay so optimistic? How can they be willing to be wild for God, wild for justice, wild for fighting the ways that things are not supposed to be? And I'm going to propose to you, that's because they put their trust in the one Son of Man in whom there is salvation. So in pairs, I'd like you to share something, and if you can put it into just a couple of words, a real fear in your congregation. How does trusting Jesus and salvation in him change that fear? And what can these stories teach us about being wild for God? Do we have any people here who need some healing? Do we have any of our churches that need some pastoral touches? Do we have any communities, do we have any people who haven't been imprinted to their community and need to be? Do we have anybody who's a little bit too uptight to be wild? No. Here's what I think we have. I think we've got a bunch of people, maybe wild, maybe a little bit domesticated animals right here who God is going to use to transform our communities, who God is going to use to share his message, share the gospel, share a message that's going to be human, that's going to be pastoral, that's going to be missional, that's going to transform lives and be wild. Let's pray. Oh God, we come out into your creation no matter where we go, because it is all yours. We come out into your community because your church is your people. It's your people who you've called in to heal them, who you've called in to imprint in a certain place, for people who you've called to be prophetic and not be content with the way things are, because you are ready to transform the world. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.